Okay, welcome everybody to the York Festival of Ideas. It's just amazing to see you all in person here, but also online as well. We've got quite a lot of people joining us online today. And yeah, welcome to our event brought to you by FixOurFood. And FixOurFood is a research program here at the University of York. And today we're going to be talking about sustainable, healthy, tasty food for all. So yeah, really good, great topic. And I'm delighted to be chairing the panel. I'm Bob Doherty. I'm the Dean for the School for Business and Society here at the University of York, but I'm also research lead for FixOurFood as well. And FixOurFood, we work in schools, we work with farmers, and we also work with food businesses as well, really to transform the Yorkshire food system to make it more regenerative, sustainable, and more secure for the people of Yorkshire. And it's a really, really amazing 5-year programme and a lot of people here are working on that programme. And you know, we're really enjoying it, and it's a fantastic opportunity today to kind of share some of our learnings and also debate some of the big issues around food. Obviously, if you've seen in the news for about 18 months now even, but also particularly this week, food is a really hot topic. We've seen the launch of the National Food Strategy, the white paper response this week from the government, and because of Brexit, because of COVID, and because of the Ukraine crisis, you will see that food is continuously in the news. You know, it's a really, really hot topic. And you know, if you contrasted maybe 10 years ago, where food didn't really make the front pages of the press, it now really is front and centre in national debates. And we'll speak a little bit about that today during the panel. I'm chairing, but we have some great speakers here today who are going to share their own, kind of perspectives on the food system. And you will get a chance to ask questions as well as part of the day. This will take an hour, the panel, but then we've got loads of activities for the rest of the day. You'll see in the foyer here, in the exhibition space, some really amazing activities which I'll mention later. First of all, I'm going to just introduce the speakers, say a little bit about the food system itself, and then I'm going to give each speaker a chance to about 5 minutes just to give their perspectives on the current state of the food system, with that title in mind, you know, sustainable, healthy, tasty food for all. So it gives me great pleasure, and I'm delighted to introduce who will be our first speaker, is Professor Sarah Bridle. Now, I always smile when I read this title out, your title, Professor of Food, Climate and Society. And what a great title for a professor. And Sarah joined the University of York just over a year ago now, and she was previously a cosmologist at the University of Manchester. And we're very, very lucky to have her. She leads several research programs, one called Take a Bite Out of Climate Change, which you'll see as one of the exhibitions here. But she works in FixOurFood. She leads all our kind of metrics work around the food system, and we're really delighted that you're here today to share your perspectives. And then we have Nathan Atkinson, who's one of the founders of Rethink Food, and actually a former head teacher from Richmond Hill in Leeds. And now Nathan's organisation Rethink, which actually looks at making sure that young people get a voice in the food system, was inspired by his experience as a head when kids were coming to the school in the morning feeling hungry. You know, really inspired kind of by the problems of food insecurity and school hunger. And now he works with over 100 schools, developing educational resources, campaigning materials, and actually helping those schools align themselves in their policies and in what they procure to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're really looking forward to hearing Nathan speak. And you also have a number of corporate partnerships as well with organisations like Subway and Greggs, trying to change the way that they work and transform their approach to food as well. So we're really interested to hear all about that, Nathan, later. And then we also have 2 student ambassadors here from Bite Back. We have Alex here, Alex Betts, and also Emmanuel Matikua, who's here as well. And Bite Back was founded by Jamie Oliver, it campaigns to give young people more voice in the food system. You know, give them more opportunities to talk about food, to campaign about food, and really to make food more healthy for young people. And we're going to be hearing a lot about their perspectives as well. We really thank you for coming along today. You know, it was really good to get all these different perspectives. And Rachel's here also from Bite Back, who've just set up in the north of England, which is really good, and recruiting people as well for Bite Back in the north, which is very, very exciting indeed. So Emmanuel Matuka, who's 17, is a passionate campaigner. He's a supporter of free school meals and a fairer food system, and actually called me a Renaissance man. So I really do like Emmanuel. He's at the top of my Christmas card list now. And then we've got Alex Betts, who's 17 as well, who's actually a member of the Youth Parliament and also campaigns for inclusion and diversity, and is a super campaigner and a strong debater. And you will probably have heard a number of them on Radio Leeds and other media outlets like that. Very, very, very strong campaigners, both of them, and sharing their lessons about campaigning with young people is really, really important. So thanks for joining the panel today. It's really fantastic. Yeah, so also we've got a Q&A after the speakers speak, and that will be both online and also in person. So we'll give people online a chance to ask questions as well. Now, food, it's a hot topic. As I've already mentioned, it's this week, particularly with the launch of the government white paper, is very much being debated right across the UK. And a lot of people use this term, the food system. You know, we've got to make our food system more sustainable. We've got to make our food system more equal and fairer. But what do people mean by that? What do people actually mean by food system? Well, what actually they mean is that a food system is not just about farming and production. It's also about processing, manufacturing. It's also about retailing. You know, not retailing not only supermarkets but also hospitality. It's also about food banks. And it's also about consumption, and it's also about what we do with the food waste, you know, how we reuse that food waste. So the food system involves all those activities from farming to consumption and reuse. And that's very important because it's all interconnected. Also, we expect a number of outcomes from the food system. We expect food security, we expect health, you know, food standards and healthy food. We also expect an impact on, you know, the human health, you know, to give us our sustenance, and we also expect it to be tasty as well. You know, those are all the things we expect from the food system. But if you think of all the activities and those outcomes, they are also impacted by drivers, you know, by other external factors like, for example, environmental drivers like the weather, like climate change, pollution, and they're also impacted by socioeconomic factors as well, like, for example, you know, the changes in working practices, you know, the move to 0 hours contracts, you know, the hollowing out of the welfare state, you know, and also things like COVID and the pandemic. So the socioeconomic, health, environmental drivers all impact on the food system, on those activities from farming all the way through to consumption and use and what we do with food waste. So it's quite complicated, the food system. What you do in one part of the food system might have an impact on something else in the food system. So, you know, if your school or the school that you know changes its food procurement to go to a more sustainable, healthy offering for its students, it has to be able to source that food from farmers and from the supply chain. So it needs people to change their production, sometimes, and also change their, you know, the menu of what they provide as a business. You know, so these things all have impact, and they're all interconnected. And I think, you know, when people talk about the food system, that's what they mean. So it's very important just to establish that before we talk today, because we're going to be talking about different parts of the food system. Okay, so I think I've spoke for long enough, and I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker, Sarah Bridle. And Sarah, when you talk, I'd like you to think about, you know, what is a sustainable food system, and what could it look like? So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob. And thanks for that great introduction. And I guess, in terms of a sustainable food system, I think that's a really tricky question to answer in detail. And just to cut to sort of the final point on that, I think, you know, we need to have a national conversation about what that looks like in detail. Now, in terms of, you know, what are the sort of requirements on it, very much, you know, the comments that you were making there, Bob, you know, we've got to consider the environmental impacts of the food system, so its impact on climate change, its impact on biodiversity, its impact on soil, other parts of the environment. We've also got to consider its impact on our health, and then on welfare, so human and animal welfare. So we've got the societal issues of how much people are really paid to produce food, as well as how much it costs for people to buy that food in a fair way that enables people to be healthy and happy. So there's these huge, you know, set of requirements on that. And I'd add in another requirement, which is on resilience. So we don't really know what's going to happen in the next few years. We've seen already that in the last couple of years that we can have major shocks, that we were worrying about Brexit, you know, when was it, 3 years ago, but then since then we've had COVID, and we've now got the war in Ukraine, which we'd not really, you know, we may have major climate extreme weather events coming up. These things are likely to change our food system in ways that we need to be prepared for. And we need to be factoring that into these calculations as well, and into these discussions, how we can make that really resilient. So those are the sort of external factors that we need to take into account. But we also need to do this in a way that uses the facts, the scientific information that we know, and also the kind of information that's gathered maybe in a less formal way on the ground. I was at a meeting on a farm last week, actually, run by the Sustainable Food Trust in the middle of Gloucestershire. A lot of farmers there, a lot of on the ground, literally on the ground knowledge that they're collecting as they do their work. They're always experimenting, always learning from what they did last year, and ways that we can incorporate all of that information together. But that gives us hopefully a lot of information. But when we make decisions, we need to take into account not just the sort of scientific sort of side of things, but also the fact there are really inherent vested interests in the food system, people who are already producing food in a particular way, whose livelihoods are going to be affected by any kind of change that we make. And on top of that, we've also got values. So the fact that some people may have particular values, for example, around animal welfare, or around the way that we maybe have equity across human welfare. So we've got to take into account all of these factors when we're designing the food system, this sustainable, regenerative, hopefully, giving back to nature and society and health, and undoing some of the problems that we've created in the last years. I could say a bit more in detail about climate change, because I think that's something that is obviously very topical for people, but also something it can be a bit difficult to find out the information. And we look at a packet, we can see some nutritional information, we can see the price, but actually the climate impact of that food and other environmental impacts of that food are much harder to find out. So in order to provoke some questions later on, I'm just going to do a quick poll of the audience here. So this is not really about whether you get this right or wrong. It's more about provoking you to maybe have some questions later on. So I'm just going to ask a little question first of all. Which do you think causes more climate change? An 8-ounce steak and chips, or a jacket potato and beans? So I'm going to do hands up for the steak and chips, and hands up for the beans and potato. Great. So we've got a bit of controversy there already, so that's really great. So I'm not sure whether to give you the answer now or later on, but what a lot of people are quite surprised to learn is that typically it's about 20 times the climate impact for that large 8-ounce steak and chips compared to a microwave potato and beans. But the best question of all I get asked is that it's not just one number. So it depends on how you produce that beef. It depends on how you cook that potato. You can get a factor of 5 difference in different choices there as well. So there are big differences in how much different foods contribute to climate change, a lot bigger than a lot of people realise. But also it's very hard to find that information out as a consumer. And so those of you who are here in person today can play with some of the materials on the stands out there and learn more about that. And those of you online can go to the Take a Bite Out of Climate Change website and many other resources online linked from there or elsewhere. So I hope that's provoked some of your questions and interest, and look forward to the discussion with you shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
So I'm now going to ask Emmanuel and Alex to speak individually about their perspectives, particularly about their work with Bite Back, their really important campaigning work, and maybe think about what role young people can play. You know, how can more young people get involved in the kind of issues around food for young people, you know, making it more healthy, tasty and sustainable for all. And maybe ask Emmanuel to start, then over to Alex second. Emmanuel.
Well, I think for young people it's very simple. At the end of the day, we need to be at the forefront of the change that we want to see. I mean, there's opportunities out there, and even if there aren't, you need to look for those opportunities. You need to talk to your head teachers. You need to, even if it's just as simple as forming a club where you guys can just talk about the food that's in school and then raise those issues, take those issues to your head teachers, to the people empowering your communities. You need to be at the forefront of the change that you want to see. You need to want to see a difference in the food system, because at the end of the day, it's not good enough. We need better, and a lot of the work that we do at Bite Back, we've shown that the food system in the UK, especially the food system tailored to young people, isn't doing what it should be at all. I mean, I've been talking to Nathan earlier today. Nathan used to be a head teacher. He said that there would be children who would come into his primary school at his old job who would come in hungry each and every day. And at his primary school, there weren't any provisions in place to see to it that those children were for sure getting something to eat as long as they were in school. And the fact that that happened when he was working in a primary school, that's just not good enough. And we need better. If our country is to progress, the young people, we need things in place to help us succeed and be our best selves. Young people can get involved. We need to be at the forefront of the change that we want to see. Like I've said previously, we can get involved by talking to our head teachers, seeing what we can do within our own communities, but you can also get involved in a lot of the campaigns that Bite Back has put forward. Even if it's something as simple as just reposting something on social media, as long as you're doing something that's actively affecting change, that's actively taking the issues that are affecting young people, as long as it's something that's intentional, you know what you're doing and you want to do something, even if it's something as simple as reposting something on social media, then it helps, and it's creating change, and you are a part of the change that you want to see. You are doing something, you're being a change maker, even if it's something as small and as simple as that. Obviously, social media for young people is a big way that we like to talk about affecting change and being at the forefront of the change that we want to see. Another way that young people can get involved would definitely be having those tough conversations about food. Absolutely, having those tough conversations about food, even if it's just with your friends, changing your attitudes towards food, changing the way that you talk about food and healthy eating. I think a lot of people, a lot of young people, we don't talk about food in the right way. And by that I mean, when we're talking about where we want to go on a lunch break from school, where we want to go and get food, it's, oh, let's just go to the chicken shop, let's just go to the fish and chip shop around the corner. And while there's nothing wrong with that, if you then in those situations say, guys, why don't we try something fresh for a change? Why don't we go to, I don't know, Tesco's, and why don't we go to Tesco's and maybe get a salad or something that's just a bit healthier, that's more nourishing to our bodies. If we have those types of conversations with our friends, then we're changing attitudes towards food. We're changing attitudes towards healthy eating and how our friends look at food. But at the end of the day, even if me and Alex were on a lunch break together, and I said, Alex, let's go and get something healthier than just going to KFC. I know at the end of the day, even if I wanted to say that, it would be near impossible to say that to Alex because the system doesn't promote that. In the area where I go to college, I'm surrounded by chicken shops, pizza shops, and then the only other option to go to Sainsbury's to get something healthier to eat is a 20-minute walk away from college. So it's not convenient and it's out of the way, and that's because the system doesn't do anything to help me or my friends or people like me and Alex. So it would definitely be doing the simple things like reposting on social media, getting involved, talking to the people in power, but also changing the conversations that we have with our friends, with our peers, with our parents as well. Yeah, that's what we can do to affect the change that we want to see.
Thanks, Emmanuel. It strikes me that you're a change agent. You know, really, you are. You're changing people's attitudes. You're at the forefront. It just shows the value of campaigning, doesn't it? You know, organisations like Bite Back, it's so important, that campaigning work. And also the fact that you've identified the system's not necessarily working, particularly when you're at school itself. You know, what's the choice? So really important points. I'm going to ask Alex now to say a few words as well. Over to you.
So hi everyone, my name's Alex, as Bob kindly mentioned, and I thought I would talk to you guys today about something called food deserts. A food desert is an area that is like particularly well desertified, and there's limited access to food, whether that's sustainable, unhealthy, an area that has no access to food whatsoever. And it might surprise you to know that these areas are becoming more and more popular in the UK. For example, levels of deprivation is something that really has a big impact on food, you know, in particularly like big cities with areas that are, say, more wealthier than others. You know, that really limits access, that really limits people's access to food, not having, you know, socio-economic status, really affects how people can get food. And that's something that is a really big issue in the UK. That's something that we can learn about as individuals and something that we can help to combat, whether it's giving people more access to healthy food in more deprived areas, or just people simply learning about the area that they live in and something that how they can personally change that. And I thought I would also tell you a little bit about my school as well. So there's a co-op about 1 minute walk away from my school, and we only get a 20-minute break time. So at break time, all of my friends and me, we'll all just go to the co-op and get food. I might not have food every day, but you know, it's the sort of thing that we spend our break times doing, and the unhealthy food is much cheaper than the healthier food. Like, you'll go and get a chocolate bar for like 70p, but then you'll go and get, say, like a salad for £2, and we think we haven't got time to eat a salad, we'll just go and get a chocolate bar, especially if you've got like a double lesson that period, because we want the quick calorie intake. We want the sugar to really sort of give us a boost, and that's something that's a big issue, you know, having unhealthy food that's cheaper than healthy food. It seems ridiculous, really, when you consider the amount of manufacturing and all the different processes that go in to make unhealthy food. Furthermore, there's also the way healthy food is advertised as well. I'm sure if you go into your local supermarket, you'll see green smoothies or purple salads or, you know, things like that. And I think, from my own personal experience, I don't think that's the right way that healthy food should be advertised. It really puts people off if you just see a green smoothie because you think that doesn't look nice. Why on earth would I want to go and drink some kale or something like that? But yeah, you know, it should. People just think healthy food is just about drinking a green smoothie, but it's not. There's so many different ways you can make food healthy, like salads, pasta. I think that's, personally for me, a big problem that we face. People just assume that healthy food is like that, but it's not. People just simply do not have the knowledge, whether that's not been learned about in school or their parents, or just simply the way that these healthy food companies are trying to market this to us. They just market it because they want it to, because obviously they make it quite expensive so they can generate a profit but they're not really thinking about how it will actually affect the young people. They're just thinking about how they can make a profit, which obviously something that we learn about at Bite Back is simply like, to bill it in frank terms, is just not really good enough, is it? Like, just being able to have healthy food that's extremely expensive and not nice, that's something that we aim to change at Bite Back. That's something I'm particularly interested in, the way that healthy food is advertised for young people, whether that's better packaging or different, you know, foods that we eat. That's something that like we at Bite Back aim to change. And that's something that matters quite a lot to me. I do think that has an impact on healthy food, the way it's advertised. It's such a big issue that people don't really know about because companies are quite sneaky with how they do it. But that's something that I think needs to be changed. I think something as everyone here today, we should all maybe not have healthy food like all the time, but it's something that we should know about and definitely something that we can change to our own diets, I think.
Brilliant, Alex. Well done. Yeah. Certainly, if I think back to when I was 17, I wish I could have spoken like you two guys. Yeah, just amazing. And what's also interesting is that unhealthy food is cheaper, which obviously is a problem. It's a real problem of the UK food system, and I think that will come out in the questions as well. And I don't know whether people know, but if you look at all the billions of pounds that are spent on marketing food in the United Kingdom, only 2 to 3% is actually spent on fruit and vegetables. The rest of it is spent on things like chocolate, things like carbonated drinks, etc. And that is a real problem. And if you walk into a supermarket, you very rarely see the healthy products that Alex was talking about on offer at the gondola end, or those kind of real kind of key promotional points in supermarkets. If you think about it, you often see very unhealthy products being promoted in those specific spaces. So I think there are some faults, and certainly some we've already identified today, some real weaknesses in our food system. So thanks for shedding light on that, you guys. And now our final speaker, last but by no means least, is Nathan Atkinson, who's going to talk about Rethink. And maybe when you talk about it, Nathan, if you think about a third of food in the world is wasted, what are you doing at Rethink to trying to change attitudes and behaviour around that particular topic? Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I will answer that and address that, but I think it's important to understand what Rethink Food does and most importantly, why we do it. So I'm going to take you back to 2014, so before the initiative around healthy holiday programs that funds young people to have improved access and availability of food during the holidays, before the great work of Marcus Rashford during the pandemic. So I took over the leadership of a large primary school in Leeds. It was in an area of high deprivation. We served the bottom 2% of deprivation nationally. 680 pupils on roll, 48 languages, and resource provision for children with autism. So it was the most amazing place, but also the most amazingly challenging place. We got through the first half term as a new leadership team, had what we decided was a well-deserved break during half term, and came back on the Monday morning refreshed, energized, ready to go again. And it was one of those days when everything that could go wrong did go wrong, including the gas failing in the school kitchen. So being as resourceful as ever, we gave the children sandwiches for their dinner, thinking we were doing something really positive. Now, the behaviour during lunchtime was worse than it normally was. There were fights, there was aggression, there was vandalism, violence, all kinds of stuff going on. And one of my beliefs is that all behaviour is a form of communication. So rather than yelling at these kids and saying how horrible they were for doing X, Y, and Z, I sat down with some of the young people and said, I can't imagine what it must feel like to be so angry that you've done this, this, and this. And one of the older boys stood up, he said, I'll show you. And he pointed to his stomach, he said, it hurts here. He said, I've had a week off and all I've had is bread and crisps. Now on the first day back, you normally give us a roast dinner, but you gave us more bread and more crisps, and I'm hungry. And at that point, I went back to my office and I wrote the word hunger on my office wall and vowed to address this. So I essentially started to remove hunger as a barrier to learning. So I did a number of things in my own school. I bought a toaster for every classroom so we could offer a universal breakfast. I'd been on an exchange visit to China in 2012, and I visited a school that had a coffee classroom. And when I talked to the school, they said, it's so that we can teach our children about coffee etiquette. That kind of blew my mind completely, because that was the furthest thing from my mind, but equally it inspired me. And I created a cafe in my school where we could teach maths, English, science, but more importantly, food skills. We could bring people together, and not just our young people, but families. And then I realized that I couldn't justify spending my school budget on food for families. So I was made aware that supermarkets were throwing an awful lot of food away. So I linked up with a couple of supermarkets, and I was allowed to go and collect food from there on a daily basis. So then I bought a market stall, which I put on my school gates, put the food on there, and we built this community around food. And I would, prior to this, stand at the school gates and say good morning, and people would ignore me. But when I put food there, people talked to me. We built a relationship with our community through food. And then the young people started to run this stall as a bit of a social enterprise. And it empowered people, and it started bringing people together through food. So that initiative and that point in time, the legacy of that is Rethink Food. So as Rethink Food, we're on a mission to provide food education from the ground up. And our ultimate goal is to provide 10 million hours of food education in support of improved food security. So we started off working towards hunger. Then we started to talk about food security. We defined food security under 4 pillars: availability, accessibility, utilization, and sustainability. 3 of those are direct sort of reference from the United Nations, but the 4th one, we've kind of adapted sustainability, and we think about sustainability from an environmental perspective, but also from a financial perspective as well. So how sustainable is your food life? We are working to reimagine food education. So we have a founding program, which is Rethink Food Education. So we've got 50 schools across Leeds and Bradford that take part in this. And schools get a weekly delivery of surplus food, so 7 crates of food that you would maybe see on a supermarket delivery. We work with those schools to set up a social enterprise. So they come up with their own business name, they come up with a logo, a slogan, and then they get a delivery of a stall, and they run that program, and we have modules that support that. So in total, there are about 22 hours of learning, but most importantly, we're improving availability and accessibility of food. We have our own surplus food warehouse, where last year we managed to rescue 900 tons of food from being wasted and repurpose that into schools, community groups, but also support families. And then we worked for the last 12 months on that program to experiment to see whether it could be scaled nationally with ASDA and also Fair Share. So we have had 10 ASDA community champions going into schools to facilitate the lessons, and we've had Fair Share delivering the food into those areas. That pilot will be scaled to 50 schools from September to again see if we can get more schools accessing food in this way. We have Rethink Food Futures, which introduces soil-free growing into classrooms. There is a chance to win one of those for your school as part of the FixOurFood program. So if you visit the stall afterwards, you'll be able to get a chance to win one of those for a school. It introduces soil-free growing. We say you go from a seed to salad in 60 days. Young people start their journey as a scientist, then they become a farmer. Then they become a chef, but most importantly, they become a consumer. We get children excited about eating fresh, nutritious products. Then we've got our partnership work. So we've recently been commissioned by Greggs to develop a food curriculum, which will be delivered to 750 schools over the next 3 years, and a pilot with Subway, which is starting with 10 schools, but will scale to 1,000 schools. And all these partnership opportunities, we're driving this message of improved food security, working to empower young people, to give them a voice. Amazing work from these 2 guys, but also from the work of Bite Back. So really championing, and we've shaped all our programs to be action learning focused, because in times of anxiety around climate, around the pandemic, around war, around the cost of living, if we give young people the opportunities to take positive action, that can relieve some of that anxiety, but it can also hopefully inspire, and through pester power, so empowering children within the school, but that pester power then goes to parents and try to continue to work to empower young people. And in answer to that, the food waste, 70% of food waste is estimated to occur within the home. So those 4 pillars that we talked about, particularly utilisation, when you've got the food, do you know what to do with it? So we use a phrase label literacy, so understanding best before, use by, storage, making the best of your freezer, planning, a whole load of work to go into that 1 pillar, but also to address food deserts. We've heard them called food swamps, because you can get food, but it's such poor quality within there, and that falls in with the availability and accessibility of food. Do you know where to go? And understanding the complexity of a supermarket versus a convenience store and the financial elements within there. So I think what's super clear through the conversations leading up, that the food system is very complicated and complex, and trying to find ways to cut through that with children as young as 3, through to young people 16, 17, 18. So, yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Nathan. That's brilliant, isn't it? A round of applause. I think what you said there, Nathan, was really the importance of education, particularly with young people, the importance of changing the food environment in schools. It's something we're working on in FixOurFood with partners like yourself. It's really important. Something that Alex said as well, only getting 20 minutes for lunch. I mean, that is shocking, isn't it? You know, many problems with that. And the importance of social enterprise, which I think is interesting. Young people setting up their own businesses, which is really fascinating. And the importance of partnership as well was mentioned a number of times. And what we've got here is a panel that are intervening and trying to make the food system better from a research perspective, from a campaigning perspective, and also really from a practice perspective, working in schools as a real-life intervention, trying to change the way that the food system works around a school food system. So really fascinating discussion here today. Now, we did, obviously in the food system, we haven't got everybody here represented from the food system. You know, it would have been interesting to have some businesses, maybe next year's Festival of Ideas, we'll have a panel around, Joan's putting her thumbs up there, around food and what's wrong with the kind of food economy as well, and some examples of innovation that are trying to improve the way that supply chains work and improve the choice that we have in the free market. But we also wanted farmers here today as well, and we did have the organisation LEAF, which do have a special mark for nature positive farming, but unfortunately they couldn't make it. But within FixOurFood, we do a lot of work with farmers. They're a very important part of the food system. We work with a group of farmers in Yorkshire called Future Farmers, and they're part of the Yorkshire Agricultural Society. And they are a group of innovative farmers who actually practice something called regenerative farming. And regenerative farming has a focus on improving soil health in the main. If you ever go onto a regenerative farm, often the farmers will always have a spade with them because they want to dig up the soil and show you their soil and show you how it contrasts to an intensive farm, intensive agricultural farm. And they exist in Yorkshire. They really, really are innovative. So they're practicing multiple crop rotations, so 3 to 4 year rotations. They never have any bare soil. They always have cover crops in the winter. That increases the biodiversity on the farm. They're growing taller hedgerows. They're doing all these nature positive things, as well as producing very nutritious food. And we have them in Yorkshire and we're working with them. And I think it's a future event. It'd be really lovely if one of them could come along and speak. Because farmers do get a bad press at the moment. And some of it's unfair. There's a lot of farmers doing really, really excellent work. However, our food system is creating terrible damage. It is creating, as it's currently been developed over the past 40 to 50 years, it's creating a lot of human health problems, dietary ill health. It's costing the UK economy £74 billion in total. And also you've got a problem with environmental damage as well from climate change, from biodiversity loss, so on and so forth. So there's definitely a lot to go at in terms of creating new solutions but it's important in that debate to have everybody in the debate, not for it to be polarised. And so we do need that, and it's great that we have different perspectives here. Nathan, you...
Just signpost a really interesting book that covers that subject of the regenerative farming and the food system. It's called An English Pastoral. I think it's James Burbank, if I'm not 100% sure, but it's the most beautifully written book which addresses the issues that you've just described there.
Okay. Just what is it called again?
An English Pastoral.
Yeah. I think a number of people in the audience are nodding because they've read it. So thank you very much for that. I think I'm conscious of time. We've only got like 15 minutes left. I had a number of questions I was going to ask. I'll only ask one, but I'll throw it out to the audience because it really is important to get your views and your perspectives. Giving up your Saturday morning to come here and listen to Fix Our Food, we're really honoured. We feel really privileged that you've done that. So, Sarah, I'm going to ask you a question. What shocks and myths do you think exist around the food system?
Myths around food. Well, I guess just to get a bit of information there about the climate impacts of food, because I find people are really surprised to hear that over 30% of climate change is caused by the food system. So there's often sort of, well, maybe it's not that important, but actually it's driving climate change. But then there's all sorts of myths about what parts of the food system are driving climate change. So you see surveys where you say to people, what are you doing about climate change? And often the top item that people say at that point is, I'm reducing plastic use. Now, there's lots of issues about plastic, but it's not the main cause of climate change. And in fact, if you look at something like a cucumber, then if that's wrapped in plastic, it will keep for 2 weeks. If it's not wrapped in plastic, it will last for a couple of days. And so you end up with food waste. And as we heard already, food waste is a major issue. About a third of all food is lost or wasted globally. And so if you think that's actually 10% of all climate change is caused by wasted food. So there's myths around packaging. And also, if we look at a milk bottle, for example, less than a 20th of that climate impact of that milk bottle is caused by the plastic. It's actually what's inside it. So we've got myths around packaging, and we've also, just to highlight one other one, myths around food miles. So actually, there's a lot of focus on food miles, but actually, if you look at a banana, say, it actually causes more climate impact to produce that banana than it does to transport it. But if you transport things by air, it causes 100 times as much climate impact as transporting by boat. So it's really about the air-freighted things that we need to really focus on when we're thinking about food miles.
Some really, really good points there. Certainly made me think about some of the beliefs I have. So thanks, Sarah, for that. I'm going to open it out to our wonderful audience here today. And already we've got a hand up here. Maybe if you introduce yourself very briefly and pose your question, please. There's a microphone coming down. There's some very fast supporters here.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I couldn't always hear you. My question is, firstly, do you think we can really fix food within a system that is based on profit? I was quite taken aback. When I was 17, I thought I knew everything. So well done for being confident. But in our school, you had school dinners provided there or pack lunches. You talked so much about going shopping and buying, the choices that are available. The market didn't come into school like it does now with vending machines and so on. So can we fix food without thinking about all that profit to make us buy stuff that makes us sick and fat and blah, blah, blah? And the other dimension that you've barely touched on is globally. Like when I hear Fix Our Food, I think of everybody in the world. And the way that the system is rigged, not just about the air miles, but for economies to be based on exporting food when people are struggling to eat in all sorts of countries. So, not a very difficult question for you.
Yeah, no, two good questions there. One is about the way the market works in terms of profit, and then the other one is a good question about kind of the UK in a global context, and how do we also think about farmers and other people in developing economies. So I think they're important issues. Maybe I'll throw the profit one to Nathan and Emmanuel and Alex to begin with. So Nathan, do you want to? Well, you talked about, you know, social enterprises. You talked about kind of bringing different kind of business models into, and your organisation is a different business model. So what does the food economy need more of?
I think it's just so challenging, and I think the response to the national food strategy and sort of the reluctance of government to adopt some of those really important principles around sugar tax, around salt, and kind of the power that the food industry has built over time makes it very, very difficult for people at grassroots to be able to influence examples that you kind of describe. But I think the work that Bite Back are doing, in particular sort of seeing Jamie Oliver with his Eat a Mess Downing Street to protesting against the ban on junk food, which interestingly the government sort of withdrew on, but locally councils have started to adopt that independently. So I think that gradually there could be a move to that, but I just think the years that this has become ingrained, that the amount of time that it will take to undo that and to be able to address it is just overwhelmingly difficult. But I think locally, as more and more people do things, that those small steps could add up. But I fear that it may be a very long challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. You talked about the importance of policy and local action. Emmanuel, any views from your perspective on how we could make both of you talked a lot about going into the co-op at lunchtime or Sainsbury's or wherever, or the fish and chip shop. Mm-hmm. What would you like to see in the food economy?
Well, I think you already talked about whether we can actually fix a system that is sort of been put in place to prevent us from being able to make the right decisions for ourselves. But I mean, maybe this is me talking as an optimistic 17-year-old.
Do it.
I have to. But I think whether we can or not, we still have to try. It's something that we have to do everything in our power to make sure that it does happen, because I've been talking about your experiences as a head teacher, some of the things that you described previously about children being hungry. To me, that just doesn't sit right with me at all. And it angers me, and the fact that we have people in power and the economy as well isn't doing anything to help the situation. It's upsetting, it's aggravating, and to be quite honest, we need better. I know I've said that quite a lot today, but it's true, and that's how I feel. And yeah, the economy makes it very hard for us to be able to make those right decisions for ourselves. Like I said before, even if I wanted to say, Alex, let's go and get a salad today, the way that the system is set up, the way that the economy markets itself makes it very hard for me to be able to even make that decision. And having 20-minute breaks, like Alex said, makes it impossible for me to take 20 minutes to go down the road to get something healthier to eat, then come back up to college and be on time for my lesson. So the economy needs to change. We need to see changes so that we can have a fairer food system and a food system that promotes healthy eating for young people.
I think that behavioural change of the consumer as well is a huge thing that kind of been shaped by advertising and by choice. And it was really interesting. It made me think about my behaviour this week when you were talking about having a green smoothie. So I was with a group of people this week, and I ordered a green drink. And when it came, and I've only just thought of this when you mentioned it, I belittled myself because I said, oh, they've just got that straight out the canal, haven't they? Whereas if I'd have been ordering a Coke or another fizzy drink or a well-known brand, I wouldn't have thought that because of the programmed nature of advertising, marketing that's embedded and ingrained over the years. But to subconsciously belittle myself for having something that was healthy, I was just looked back on that and thought how sort of significant that was, really.
Thanks, Alex.
Well, I mean, you asked two questions about how you can fix your food and sort of globally. And I think if we sort of look at how other countries have done that, that might help us to understand. So, for example, in a lot of countries in like Asia, such as Japan and China, they actually make sure that every single person has the same food. So, like, all schools provide exactly the same meal for every single person, and it's free. So no one has to pay for the meals. Every single child gets the same food. They're all treated equally. They all sit down at a table together and eat it. There's a really big community sort of feel. And I do feel maybe we shouldn't give everybody free food in England, but we could sort of impose a similar strategy of maybe giving people the same food once a week so everyone sort of knows how to be equal. Because I think equality is a big issue in food, like I mentioned. Some areas that are more deprived than others are going to have better food, really. So I do think having equal food for everybody could definitely be a good strategy that we could follow, like countries like China and Japan, and impose that in England as well. And also, if I wanted to mention the green smoothie again, it's not a good topic, but it's not all bad because like you can drink it quickly and it's definitely time effective as well. So I wouldn't say it's like a bad healthy food. I just think there's other healthier foods that you could probably impose as well in like shops that could be better, really.
Yeah, it's a great point in terms of culture. A lot of you talking about food culture, I think, and free school meals is definitely a hot topic. Something that didn't get featured in the government's food strategy, sadly. But surely, if everybody had a proper healthy diet at schools, educational attainment would increase, and I think that's lost in the debate, I think. So thanks for sharing that with us. We've got, I think we've got time for one more question. Joan, do you want to? Then we'll take one more. We'll take two questions actually. We'll take them both together. So we'll take. Yeah.
I'm going to be cheeky and ask two questions. The first of which is, a bit like big housing developers have to set aside a proportion of their assets for affordable housing, should we be looking at the amount of money that food companies spend on advertising and ask them to contribute a proportion of that spend towards the kinds of programmes that Nathan's described? And then secondly, I'm always very struck by people who simply don't have access to cooking facilities in temporary accommodation and so forth. Is there an opportunity to align food banks, community kitchens, and the kinds of projects that you're so brilliantly delivering to do more around education and giving access to cooking facilities for families?
And then we'll take this question here. Thanks, Joan. This question here as well.
Hello there. My name's Caroline. Thank you very much, all of you, for all your contributions. They've all been really interesting, actually. It's something that I've got more interested in of late. So, and especially also, I wanted to draw attention to a recent podcast. I don't know if any of you have listened to, on outrage and optimism. It's the latest one that they've done on how to feed the world without devouring the planet. And it's excellent, and it has 4 different speakers, of which you will know George Monbiot, he's got a big part in the podcast. And he talks about there being a food crisis. It is largely an economic crisis, which I think is what you've always said, rather than actually a production crisis. And that's one of the factors he looks into. And another thing he mentioned about the development of perennial crops rather than annual crops, which cause a lot less damage to the climate. And I thought that was... But there's loads in that podcast that it would be of interest to most people that are here.
That's brilliant. And so we've got a few questions, and we've got a question online as well. Schools have a lot of purchasing power. They seem to be happy to buy cheap imported food, low welfare standards. How can this be changed in schools? So we may come ask Nathan about that as well. So there's a couple of questions there. One is about what can we do to repurpose profits within the food system to actually intervene in terms of getting more healthy food into communities. And there was actually a tax proposed in the National Food Strategy, a tax on high-fat, sugar, salt foods, which was then going to, that tax would then have been used, the money would have been used to actually intervene and get more fruit and veg into disadvantaged areas, but the government didn't put that in its white paper. For some reason, they thought it might lead to an increase in cost of food, but actually it was a tax on companies, not consumers. So I think it was misunderstood. And I was disappointed not to see that tax because it would have been really useful. It would have been a market change. Yeah, so, and then so I think, Joan, we need to keep campaigning on that. We need to keep campaigning on kind of this tax for high-fat, sugar, salt foods because would be very, very useful. I'm going to ask Sarah to ask the question related to George Monbiot, and then I'll ask you guys on the school food. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so I think you particularly highlighted the perennial versus annual crops. And I guess George Monbiot is also well known for many different angles on this, including rewilding, that kind of thing. So I think that certainly in terms of the climate impact of the food system, then it's really important to lock carbon into the soil. And there's a number of different ways of doing that, but certainly ploughing up the fields every year is actually degrading the soil and releasing a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. There's different ways to approach that. So one of the ways is minimum tillage. So instead of ploughing up the soil every year, you leave that in, and that you leave what's there in, and then you drill in. And another way of doing that is with perennial crops that are there all the time. Grass is a perennial crop, for example, but also trees, tree fruits, nuts, that kind of thing. So that's another way of bringing all that. So it's definitely a really important part of the equation. And there's different ways of trying to disturb the soil less. And I guess, ultimately a lot of these comments we're having about economics is about actually paying the true cost of food. And so we've got the economic cost of food, the environmental cost of food in terms of the climate impacts that we're having to deal with and pay for the result of extreme weather events, for example, but also on the health service, the cost of cheap food and unhealthy food, which is actually then leading to obesity crisis and other crises which are costing the health service. So it's about paying the true cost of food, relatively speaking, for different types of food, while then supporting economic access and access to the brilliant comments we've already had about free school meals for all, for example, would be a brilliant example of that. Thank you.
Great questions, by the way. And this one about what can schools do with their food procurement to change the food offer for young people? Any examples of best practice?
I think that the challenges around budgets and priorities coming out of the pandemic with children, young people missing school, the government focused on reading, writing and maths catch-up. So then to think about changing sort of lunch times and priorities around food kind of is a bit lower down the priorities, but also funding for schools is an issue. So I think a school is funded, or they've increased the school funding per meal, but the amount that you're funded per meal is actually less than it costs to provide that meal. So schools are always in a deficit in terms of being able to fund those meals anyway. So you're not funded for the true amount of the meal. So therefore it's kind of looking at a school funding issue because then the pressures are on schools to be able to take from other areas of the budget to offset that. On social media this week, there's been a lot of talk around some school meal providers actually withdrawing from schools because they can't actually afford to deliver what's within sort of contractual or the expectations anyway. So that cost of living, the cost of food is starting to squeeze and on something that is already below what we would expect it to be in terms of those offers available to children and young people.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Okay, that's been a really good, I think we've learned this morning the importance of keeping the pressure on policy in terms of improvements in the food system. We need to keep the pressure on government because their white paper's not really responded to some of the issues that was raised today. The importance of campaigning, brilliant. Thanks, Emmanuel and Alex, for coming along and sharing your perspectives and the voice of young people, obviously a very important part, and the importance of science, you know, giving that information, you know, that kind of helps people to understand the complexity of the food system is really, really important. And interventions like Nathan's on Rethink, you know, doing that work, those are the kind of innovative interventions that we obviously need in the food system, because it is causing terrible damage. Remember, it is a really important economic sector as well. It's the largest, food and drink is the largest manufacturing sector in the United Kingdom. So it's going to continue to be a hot topic because of all the social and economic and environmental dimensions that we've discussed today. I want to thank all the speakers. I want to thank the audience for coming along to the York Festival of Ideas. It's such an amazing public engagement, 2 weeks of events, and you're welcome to come to all our events up across the city of York. This is not finished though, because after this panel debate is finished, we've got loads of activities in the Ron Cook Hub here. You can even go and taste some electronic daisies, believe it or not. We have as part of FixOurFood, we have our own urban indoor vertical farm in the centre of York. We produce basil, we produce all sorts of micro herbs, but we're also producing these electronic daisies. And you have to go and see it to believe it. So please go ahead. We've got Take a Bite Out of Climate Change, we've got FixOurFood, we've got Rethink, and Bite Back, all here today for helping organise, but also all the York Festival of Ideas team, which is led by John Cole-Cannon here, and just a fantastic series of events. And finally, thank you all for coming along, but also our speakers. Let's give them a final round of applause.